Thanks for the, here we go. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and for those who could join us in the room, we do love the in-person presence. So thank you all for coming out. This is really fun. A couple of announcements just from the get-go. Some upcoming events. On May 15th, Phyllis Resnick will be speaking to us about the Colorado Disproportionate Impact Indicator, a very cool tool that was recently developed to analyze how certain communities are impacted by projects across the state of Colorado. So please register for that if you're interested. June 26th, we've got Professor Zhao speaking to us about Colorado's economy. That'll be, or I'm sorry, China's economy, something very different than Colorado's economy. Should be a really great event. And then thereafter, we've got the DABE summer event in July, an immigration topic scheduled for August, and in September, Colorado's Clean Energy Fund. So you should see some announcements coming in about each of those events. Finally, just want to thank all of you. This is a volunteer-run organization. The board makes it happen. And so those of you who are board members, can't thank you enough for your volunteerism, the hours that you put into this, and the work that you put into making our organization what it is. So thank you so much. Additionally, our members, really the bread and butter of what makes this organization possible is the fee revenue from our membership. So thank you so much for being a part of DABE. If you'd like to join DABE, please use that QR code or go to dabedenver.org. It's pretty easy to sign up. We'd love to have you become a member if you're not. And then finally, a thank you to our host, Metropolitan State University of Denver. Thanks for having us. This has been wonderful. It's a great space. And thank you all for coming. Great, we'll get started. And so I'll introduce our speaker. Dr. Vipin Arora is the director of the Bureau of Economic Analysis. Just gonna change up the slides real quick. Dr. Arora oversees the production of closely watched economic statistics that provide an objective and timely picture of the US economy. He works with BEA's executive team to expand the agency's statistical programs and collaborates with BEA's researchers to bolster the impact and effectiveness of research that furthers the agency's mission. Before joining BEA, Dr. Arora served as deputy director of the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics and led economic analysis at the U.S. Energy Information Administration. He also served as an intelligence officer with the U.S. Army and as an analyst with the U.S. Government Accountability Office. Dr. Arora holds a PhD in economics from the Australian National University and a master's degree in public administration from Syracuse University. We're very lucky to have him, and I'll hand it over to him. Take it away. Thanks so much.
Well, thanks everyone. It's great to be here. I was telling Kate earlier that I haven't been in this part of. I've been in Colorado a little bit, but not in Denver since 2000, since they had started redoing all this around Coors Field. So it's kind of really cool to walk around here and see how nice the area has become. I did not realize that I've never given a talk with a view of roller coasters in the background. So I'm gonna try. I have to take a picture and send it to my kids, but I appreciate the chance to be here and to talk to you all, because I've got a bunch of slides, but we don't need to go through them. I'd love to have a conversation with you. They're really prompts for your questions and comments, and really my goal and our goal in being here today is to get your wish list, to get your feedback. I mean, you're all taxpayers. We want, I'd like you to walk out of here thinking, you know what, those are tax dollars well spent. At BEA. That's the framework we come in with. So we're open to all kinds of feedback. And I always like to say, we don't know what we don't know. So, we have to hear from you all. If there's certain products you need or want, those are really important conversations for us. So with me today, my colleague, Marissa Crawford, she oversees the compilation of our GDP estimates, which we'll talk about a little bit. And so if you have questions, related to that, PCE, personal consumption expenditures, that kind of stuff, I think Marissa's a much better person than I am to talk about some of that stuff. But we'll both spend some time and start with anything that you're wondering before I jump in, because the slides are boring, man. Like it's be a lot funner to have a conversation. Anyone We get asked about PCE prices all the time. We get asked about the statistical discrepancy between GDP and GDI. Anyone? No one? No takers? All right, so I'll jump in. But actually, before I start, I know we've got some heavy users of BEA data. Is there folks that don't? I'm assuming there's some folks that know who we are but don't spend a lot of time in our data. Is that about right? And then we've got a few that probably have never heard of us, right? That's generally what we find. So that's what I'll go with. So I'll start with kind of a story, which I think is the hallmark, of BEA, and that is, I think you see it from the fact that we're here, is that the Bureau, is all about responsiveness. And so back in the 30s, you remember in the mid 30s, President Roosevelt, passed Social Security legislation in 1935, right? And that included, for the first time, unemployment insurance coverage, and included some other, Social Security program and whatnot, right? And one of the challenges at that time the administration was having was figuring out what's the impact of this. You got to understand, their federal statistics were in their infancy, and the administration was trying to figure out how do we judge the impact of the transfer payments, particularly from the unemployment insurance program. And so at that time, BEA didn't exist, but there was an entity in the Department of Commerce called the Bureau of Foreign and Domestic Commerce, BFDC, and I'll come back to this in a second. And we had in 1934, for the first time, published something called national income. And that was the first time that had been published. National income is a very old concept. It's the predecessor to GNP and GDP, but that goes back, to the 1600s. But so we had published national income, and we were starting to do it. Government agencies hadn't regularly done this in the United States, right? But that came out every year, and they wanted something that gave us more like the pulse of the economy. So what BFDC did in that top panel there, you'll see, is we published something called monthly income payments, right? And so we were able to do it monthly, and this is basically wages paid out to workers. So it gave folks a sense of what are the wages being paid out, right? But it didn't include the transfer programs, and so remember, this is before computers and anything else. BFDC leadership heard that. They talked to stakeholders, particularly in the administration. They heard that, and very quickly, by October, in that middle panel there, we were able to publish something that included those transfers, and we called it monthly income payments, revised monthly income payments. That's something you all today, those of you familiar with BEA statistics, know as personal income. That got renamed personal income in the 1940s. That's where personal income comes from. That's why it includes transfers, because that's what the administration at the time, the Roosevelt administration, needed to help assess programs, right? And then, of course, and I know some regional economists in here, people are like, well, that's great, the national personal income, but what about at the state level, right? And so this is amazing to me. By April of 1940, we had monthly state personal income, which I was talking to someone earlier that uses that, right? State personal income. That state personal income is still used today. When Congress gives out, or the administration gives out, block grants for Medicaid, that's what they use, is per capita state personal income to do that. And so it's a very important metric. It started there in 1940. So I start with that story because I think it's important to understand kind of the roots of BEA are in that type of responsiveness to stakeholder needs. And we'll finish with that again on some stuff we did during the COVID pandemic. So then what I had planned to do was to go over a high level overview. And I like to talk about history, and I'll give you a little bit of history of BEA. And I'll watch the crowd to see how many people are falling asleep, and then I'll quickly move through it because sometimes it hits, sometimes it doesn't. And then we can talk about our products. But at any time, man, if you want to talk, if you have questions or you got comments, that's really what we would want is to have that conversation with you, right? So overall, like, what do we do? What does BEA do? I mean, we provide, I think, the world's best economic statistics. So that includes things like GDP, which is the one that everybody knows, right? But we've got personal income. We've got the U.S. services trade balance. We do jointly with the Census Bureau. We do the U.S. trade balance, corporate profits. So hopefully some of these are ringing a bell, and on and on and on. Right? We do. I mean, if you don't use our statistics, I assure you that there is a statistic that we have that you can use. So I use this analogy sometimes. Anyone ever like go to the buffets in Las Vegas? No? Yeah, I don't see. So I used to love going. There's one particular one on the Strip, the Luxor buffet that so I used to go to all the time, right? And it's because, so I would not eat all day and then I go there at night because they have the best dessert buffet, right? And so you can get whatever dessert you want, like cheesecake without strawberries or with strawberries or chocolate, whatever you wanted, you could get it, right? And that's kind of when I think of our statistics, honestly, I think that's what I always think of. It's a weird comparison to make, but I always think of the Luxor buffet, right? Like you would always, my wife would be like, "Are you sure you want another one?" I'm like, "Yeah, I haven't tried that one yet." So anyways, that's kind of the way I think about our statistics. And so if you haven't used them, I would encourage you to get in there and just have a look, because you'll find something guaranteed that, that you like. All right, a little bit on history. Our lineage actually goes back to 1820, according to the National Archives. So that's where we pulled some of this information from. The modern BEA shows up around the turn of the last century, so around 1900. So but we started an international trade, and the government trying to figure out how much, the tariffs they could put on imported goods. So they had to get, collections around that, and then it kind of morphed over time. I will say that, so around 1900, we kind of transitioned to what you see. And around that time, for those of you who, are interested in your economic history in the United States, a big deal was a lot of international issues were front and center at that time. Trade was one of them, but also things like remittances from immigrants. What was that looking like? U.S. foreign direct investment abroad. Was that costing jobs domestically? These were all conversations that were going around, as we transitioned from the 18 to the 1900s. And so, our oldest two continuous products at BEA are, one, the U.S. balance of payments, which we did first in 1923, and U.S. foreign direct investment abroad. And that we did in 1930. So those are the first two products that we have. GDP, what we call the national income, didn't show up till 1934. That was the first time you saw that. And so after the 30s, then you start to see kind of the modern BEA show up. And we became the Bureau, of Economic Analysis in 1972. And so we celebrate our 50-year anniversary a couple of years back, right? So that's a little bit about the history. I think it's important to understand kind of the suite of products we have and why things are organized the way they are. And that actually leads me to something that you shouldn't care about, but you need to know about, right? You should care about the data, right, that the federal government provides. But I think it's important for you to have a little background on the different organizations that are providing it, because sometimes I'm sure you go in, you want a certain data set, and maybe you come to BEA and you can't find it. But then you're like, well, maybe the census has it, or maybe BLS has it, and while that's not optimal for us, there's a reason for that. Some of it has to do with historical development, but some of it has to do with the fact that we have a federal statistical system that we call decentralized. And so there's 13 so-called principal federal statistical agencies that are there. BEA is one of them, but also the Census Bureau is the biggest one. The Bureau of Labor Statistics is another one. Those are kind of your three primary economic statistics agencies. But you've got many others, National Center for Health Statistics and whatnot. So that's kind of the organizations that provide you the statistics that you use, and it's coordinated out of the Office of Management and Budget. And there's a person called the Chief Statistician in the United States, Karen Orvis, who helps to coordinate that. But individually, these organizations still report up through their departments. And again, it shouldn't matter, but it does. Bureaucratically, we all know that those things do tend to matter, right? And so, like for BEA, we're in the Department of Commerce, and so Census and BEA both report up through Commerce. So that means that our budgets are coming through Commerce. Even though we're coordinated in this system, the budgets are coming through Commerce, right? So that gives you a little sense of kind of where we sit, where we came from, and some of our, I guess, sister agencies. Any questions on that? Comments? Nothing. All right. So then let's talk about kind of the statistics. And one of the first things when I got to BEA, I asked for is give me a picture, and because I like pictures of what's the best picture we can come up with that gives a comprehensive view of everything we do. And while this isn't the prettiest picture I think I've ever drawn or we've ever drawn, I think it does give you a sense of the scope and magnitude of everything that BEA does. And the analogy I would use here, I would think about it as think of a puzzle, right? So those three kind of blue boxes at the top, international, national, regional, those are what we call our economic accounts, right? And there's three characteristics that I would point out with those accounts. And the analogy here I use is a puzzle. And one is those accounts are all interconnected, right? So just think of a piece of a puzzle, right? They got to connect together, right? They're interconnected. They're all consistent. So they fit together just like pieces of a puzzle. And then when you put them all together, they give you the whole picture and they're comprehensive. And that's the way I would describe the economic accounts that we produce at BEA. So they're interconnected, they're consistent, and they're comprehensive. So when we give you a piece of information, if we tell you state GDP for Colorado, that's going to be consistent with national GDP that we produce, every month that you see, in the news. You don't always get that consistency with other statistics. So you have that when you're talking about our economic accounts. And we'll talk a little bit about each of the products from these different areas within BEA. I did want to highlight that, while that's the kind of framework that we have, we also do a lot of other types of work. So we call special analyses, like the distribution of personal income is something that's, that we spent a lot of time on recently. We've done a lot of work on global value chains. Does anyone here work on global value chains? It's like the one, man, I go and no one's ever like, yeah, I do this, like everything else, everyone's like, yeah, this is great. Right? And we got a lot of research going on. It'd be natural capital is a particularly hot topic right now, but digital economy, data as an asset is another one in terms of capitalizing data. And then we do some joint work with the Fed and BLS. But let me talk a little bit about the satellite accounts because these are really popular with folks. And what these are supplementary statistics that we have that pull out a certain sector or area of the economy to focus on it. So, we have a satellite account on outdoor recreation. And so I can tell you that the outdoor recreation accounts for about 2.2% of GDP in 2022. Like, so that we're consistent with the national accounts and we can put it in that framework and we can tell you that. If you were just looking at our standard GDP stuff, you can't get that out of those tables. So we have to separate it out in these satellite accounts and do it. And that's what we use it for. We get more requests for, everybody wants their own satellite account, right? Like we've got 7 of them and I'll talk a little bit about them, but like our latest one is the space economy one. So we have an estimate of the size of the US space economy. And we're considering others, but there's a lot of interest around that. So that gives you the kind of the 30,000 foot view of what we do at BEA. From here, I'll jump into some specific kind of initiatives that we're doing. And then I'll go into some new stuff, some innovation like data as an asset and whatnot. Any questions, comments? Nope. All right. All right. So first, GDP. You got to start with GDP. And so I really like this picture because if you go back to Macro 101, if you remember, we always talk about the 3 ways to calculate GDP, if you remember that, right? You can do GDP by expenditures, you can do GDP by income, and you can do GDP by production or industry, right? And they should, in theory, all 3 equal, right? Because of different data sources, they often don't. And we tend to get a lot of questions, particularly around the differences between GDP by expenditures, which is our feature measure, and GDP by income, which we call gross domestic income. That there's a lot of people that have interest in that, right? Anyone ever been to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan? Yeah. So did you cross the Mackinac Bridge? Yeah. So right, one day I was on vacation and we had been getting barraged with questions about the difference between GDP and GDI. And there's a McDonald's on the side where St. Ignace is. If you go to the north side of it, right? And this McDonald's must be have the prettiest view in the world because you can see the Mackinac Bridge from the McDonald's in St. Ignace. And I'm standing there and I'm thinking, what a different view you get of the bridge from here than when we drove over it, than when we were on the water looking up at it, right? And I thought, man, that's kind of like, it's kind of like the way we think about GDP, right? It's the same thing, but you're just getting a different perspective on it if you measure it from the income side or the expenditure side or the production side. Yeah, in theory, they should equal, but we know our data sources aren't perfect, so they never do. But we think we do pretty good getting them close together, right? And so I always try to make that point with with the folks, particularly the Wall Street folks, are really fixated on GDP versus GDI. Is there, and rightfully so, is there information in GDI that might help them in forecasting or whatever they need to do, right? That's what they're trying to figure out. So it makes sense where they're coming from. But from our perspective, we're giving you, it should be the same thing, but we're giving you, our best estimate of gross domestic income with the data sources that we have, right? So anyways, it's always important to remember that, right? That the GDP is not just GDP by expenditures. It also includes the other two ways to look at it, which we also do produce. I will mention here that GDP by expenditures comes out 30 days after a quarter ends. So at the end of this quarter, Marissa's team will be publishing what we call the advanced estimate of GDP. And that's the most popular one, right? It's the first look at what happened in the first quarter of 2024. That's when you'll be able to see it next week, I think, right? Next Thursday, yeah. So the second estimate is where we traditionally publish GDI. So you get GDI at the second estimate. So GDP by the income method, you get at the second estimate. That'll be 60 days after the end of the quarter. And then what we call gross value add, or GDP by production, you get 90 days after. So, the timeliness differs on these. And these have gotten a lot tighter over the years, but that, there's a different cadence to each of them, right? That you get. And we could talk more about that if you want. But so important to remember that. Questions, comments? Yep.
Jenny says, I've heard it suggested, okay, she was going to say, oh yeah, I can relate, okay. But the true measure of GDP is the average of GDP and GDI. GDP comes out sooner than GDI, so people put more emphasis on it. So she's curious if one is considered better than the other. Should we put more confidence in one or the other?
Yeah, that's a good question. And so I won't directly answer it because I think you have to look at the source data and make your own judgment on that. I will say that we feature GDP by expenditures, the one that comes out 30 days after a quarter. And the reason we feature it is because we think it has the highest quality and most timely source data. That's the primary reason we focus on it. And I'm just going to give a little bit, if you don't mind, I'm going to expand on that a little bit, right? When you think about gross domestic income, right? There's a difference between GDP and GDI that we call the statistical discrepancy. And we publish it in a table. You can look at it. If you read, you get your Goldman update, they're going to talk about it. You'll see it all there, the statistical discrepancy, right? And that's what they're focused on. And so when you think about the GDI measure, keep in mind a few things, right? So first is that's since about 2000, the statistical discrepancy has changed sign. So there's no consistent pattern, no trend that at least we can find in the statistical discrepancy. I'm not saying it's random noise. That's not what I'm saying, but I am saying there's no predictable pattern that we've been able to find, or at least that I'm aware of anyone's been able to find in the statistical discrepancy. It has tended to change sign, right? That's the first thing, right? Second thing is that our best income data it comes in about a 2-year lag, roughly speaking. And that's because it's tax data. Tax data takes time. So the best income data is on a 2-year lag. That's not true with the expenditures data. It's a much shorter lag for us on that one. Third thing, corporate profits are a big part of gross domestic income. I mentioned that earlier, right? Corporate profit, the thing, we call it corporate profits, but it's corporate profits from current production. Think about that for a second. Like, if you're making an airplane, Boeing's making an airplane, and they're producing it over a year and a half, how do you assign the profits from that airplane once it's sold to a particular quarter? That's the art of some of this when you think about assigning corporate. So the corporate profits piece and aligning it to quarters can be challenging. We've been doing it for a long time, so we have very good methods, and we're able to, to kind of check what we do, but it's not an exact thing, right? It's hard for companies to do it, let alone for us to do it standing, outside. So the corporate profits from current production can be challenging to assign to quarters. And again, that's on the income side. And then finally, and I know I'm giving you a lot here, but I think the fourth thing I'd keep in mind is that in tax information, which we use heavily in the income data, there tends to be a lot of misreporting. And you can see it takes about 2 years for us to find out the scope of that misreporting every year. So when you're talking about something like profits, if there's misreporting, that means that the profits would vary, right? They would change. Which you would expect, right? It happens in personal returns as well. The challenge is that it's not small. It's a really big number. It's billions, so that we have to actually adjust for it when we do corporate profits, because otherwise we would be way off. And we're pretty good at it, but it's not an exact science, right? And so I think those four things I always keep in mind when I talk about the CISL discrepancy. Particularly the corporate profits piece can be really hard. So hopefully that was more than Jenny than you wanted, but like I want to give you the whole picture of that. So we feature GDP for by expenditures for those reasons. Yeah, it's a great question. So we've got, of course, that's all national level GDP, right? But we've also got state level GDP, which is very popular. The state level GDP, and the thing about our state level GDP is that it's based on income data. We don't have, and we're working towards it. We don't have expenditure level GDP at the state level because we'd have to do that for 50 different states, right? We want to get there, but that's still a goal in the future for us. So we don't have C plus I plus G plus NX for 50 states. What we have is income data that we use, and then we're able to get the GDP numbers. And of course, we have what we call GDP by industry, gross value added. So you can see at a national level too, how much did industries contribute to overall GDP growth or the level of GDP. So yeah, we've got the national, and you can look at it 3 different ways, but then you can also do it by industry. You can also do it by state. You can also do it by metro area. You can also do it by county, actually. So we've got county level GDP, and we're trying to speed that up as well. Right now it's just annual. But that's going to take some time. So we do have a lot of different ways to look at it, the size of certain economies. Questions? You guys want to speed that up? You want us to speed that up, right? Yeah, that's we always get, hey, can you do that faster? And can you go like, don't go to county, go to like a census tract, right? Go to our block level, right? That's what everybody, and we would love to. I mean, we would love to. Maybe someday we'll get there. The other thing we have, and I'm just highlighting, kind of picking certain products here, but we can take this anywhere you all want, is we try to gather, there's a lot of data, right? So we try to gather it for, particularly for states, and we've got this, this BEA regional facts, we call bare facts, right? And so we kind of bring it all together in one place. And I think this is really helpful for people. There's some people in this room that never want to look at this, right? You want to use your API, hit the tables and get what you need, right? So there's a group of you in here that are like that. But there's others of you like me that are like, I don't really know how to write the code. I would rather just read something that you all put together and highlight for me. What do I need to know about Colorado? And so you can do that in the bare facts, right? And we got it for every state. We do it for states, right? We don't go beyond. Yeah, just states right now. Yeah, and staff really like putting this together too, actually, because it's interesting to kind of find out about different states and highlight different things. So if you're interested in just a quick overview, Fairfax is the place to go, I think, to get some of those facts. Oh yeah, RPPs. Has anyone ever heard of these before? Regional price parities. That's cool. So yeah, so these I think Marissa might not agree because she's a national accounts person, but like I think these are the most underappreciated statistic that we have. So everyone remembers when you took international economics and you had those PPP exchange rates that where you're able to kind of compare price levels across countries. Well, that's what these are for states. So you can compare like the cost of living in different places. People on the Hill love these. It's hard to kind of get your head around, but when I make that PPP comparison, people are like, yeah, I get it right away, right? So you're able to compare, the Denver metro area with the Chicago metro area, because we go down to the metropolitan areas for these as well. And we've got, of course, the state ones as well. Yep. Oh, that's a good question. Do you know? I don't know. I mean, so when I think about an RPP, so local CPI, you're taking a basket of goods, right? And you're just tracking the price, the prices. And I guess you could compare the baskets of goods over different geographies. But I'm thinking through it. I've never thought about that. So maybe we'll get your contact info. We'll get back to you. That's a really good question. I know we use regional CPIs in the construction of RPPs. So they're part of it, but they're not all of it. So I don't have a succinct answer to what the differences are. That's really good. One of the things I would like to see in the next few years is county level RPPs as well. And we have some issues. We don't think the quality of the data is quite there yet for that. That's why we don't go below the metro area. But if we can work through a few issues we have, we think that that we can get to the county level. So if you haven't seen these, you haven't tried them, check them out. There's some really good stuff with RPPs. The other thing is they're annual, because not only are they based on the CPIs, they also use survey data from the American Community Survey for some of the shares, how we break things out, and that's annual. And so while we would love to do it on a higher frequency, because we know prices change in local areas, a lot throughout, can change a lot throughout the year. We have to figure out then, all right, how do we get to somewhere where we could change the frequencies faster, because our underlying source data, some of it is based on, on annual surveys. So that's another thing that we're looking into with these, is if we can do it more frequently. All right. Yeah, thanks for that question, man. That's a good one. Every time I always get so I usually, we get I always ask for questions and I'll get 20 of them that I can't answer. And I'm like, well, so it's educational for me too. So I really like that. All right, international. And so does anyone use our international statistics? Good. So I need to do a better job of selling, because this is where we started, right? And so our international area, right? There's a few things that come out of there, but we have 17 surveys that we run out of this part. We don't generally, BEA doesn't do surveys, but we have to do them in this area to find out things like the extent of U.S. services trade. So when you see the U.S., you see the U.S. trade deficit was X amount last month. What you're seeing there is a joint release from BEA and from the Census Bureau. They do the goods part, we do the services part. And that services trade balance every month is coming from 7 of these surveys, is where you get that information from BEA. So part of what we do is the U.S. services trade balance. So, tourism is a huge service export, right? That's a big part of it, right? But there's a bunch of other stuff. That's what you see, right? The other part, another big part of it is that this is where we have our information on foreign direct investment, both going out, so U.S. foreign direct investment abroad, and then inward foreign direct investment. So there's a niche group of people that are really interested in those statistics, and that's the remainder of the surveys focus on multinationals and foreign direct investment, both inward and outward. And there's a lot of more detail on multinationals as well coming out of those surveys. Right? And then the final two pieces we have here are what I started with, and that is the balance of payments. So you remember that from Macro 101, the U.S. balance of payments. We now call that the international transactions accounts, the ITAs. It doesn't have quite the same ring to it, to me at least, as the balance of payments does, but it's the same concept, and it's focusing on our transactions with other countries, the U.S. transactions with other countries. And so you can see a lot of detail in there about things like remittances and so on and so forth, right? Not just the trade, the flow of goods, but also other things as well. And then something we call the international investment position. So U.S. assets and liabilities. So, foreign assets and liabilities in the United States, foreign assets in the U.S., U.S. assets abroad, that kind of thing. You can see that in the international investment position. If I had to pick a second statistic that I think is the most underutilized, I'd say it's the IIP, or the international investment position. I really like it. I think people see it and they're like, yeah, I can see that, but they don't use it as much as I wish they would. So that's another one. So a lot of great detail in our international area as well. And the satellite accounts. So here's our 7 satellite accounts. And like I said, these are super popular, man. Like everybody wants their own satellite account. Some of these are funded by other agencies like Arts and Culture, the National Endowment for the Arts. Of course, they want to know what's the size of the arts and cultural sector in the U.S. How much activity is there around it? Travel and tourism, the International Trade Administration is really focused on that. States are very interested in both travel and tourism and outdoor rec. Those two, we get a lot of interest from states. NOAA, the national, right? Yeah, they fund the marine economy one, so they would like to understand that. So anyways, yeah, so we get a lot of interest in these. And so, have a look. If you want your own satellite account, let us know. We'll throw it in the queue and we can see. Healthcare is an interesting one here because in the national accounts, we have healthcare, but it's basically spending on things like doctor's visits. It's a total amount of spending. What we do here for the healthcare satellite account is we try to track it by disease. What's the spending by disease? And so we've been doing this for 20 years. This has been a research effort for us. And we get millions and millions of records from the Center for Medicaid Services. And we use those to kind of build up in terms of spending by disease. And it's something we've been working on a long time, but it's a very hard space. And it's another area I feel like I wish people use more because it's, this is where you can start thinking about is the spending being effective. Whereas when you're looking at it by disease, how much does it cost? How much are we spending on cancer, versus something else, right? This is where you can see that information. You can't see it in the national accounts because we have a different method for doing it. So here's one thing you should think about those, so we inflation adjust everything, right? In most of the concepts that we have. And a big part of inflation adjustment is quality adjustment. Those of you who have spent a little bit of time in price indexes. And so how do you quality adjust healthcare? Just think about the challenge there. So we've got nominal measures right now. We can add up total spending, but how are you going to quality adjust healthcare? There's a lot of research out there and people are trying to do it, but it is a hard business. And so that's kind of where we are right now is trying to figure out, can we produce inflation adjusted measures of healthcare spending by disease? So in real terms, has cancer spending actually gone up or not? I don't think we have a good answer to that right now. And that's one of the goals with the healthcare satellite account. Just as a side, there's my understanding, I don't know too many of the details. There's 3 kind of primary methods in the literature that people use for this. And we're debating right now, do we wait for people to coalesce or do we just put out all 3? And let folks kind of use what they want. And so we're talking about that and how we should approach it. And we'll see where we come out. Feedback is always good on that too. The challenge with putting out the 3, which I think is probably my preference, is it becomes sometimes a communication issue. People, folks get confused around, what is this the true one? Is this the real one? That kind of thing. Some of what you heard with GDP and GDI a little bit, right? So anyways, a lot to talk about on satellite accounts, but there's a lot of exciting stuff going on, particularly in the healthcare one. All right, innovations. Any questions before I move on?
Yes. Do you plan to talk independently about the personal income statistics, or is now a good time to ask about that?
No, let's talk.
So one of the BEA products that my team uses extensively are the state level personal income statistics, and particularly the component series. We noticed that there are occasionally pretty significant revisions going back kind of a long way in terms of how those data are reported, especially at the component level. And we've talked to members of the BEA staff before about specific revisions. We've reviewed the methodological documentation, stuff like that. I just wanted to get your perspective as, the guardian of all of this information on when you and your team identify potential process improvements that could produce better quality data sets, how do you weigh the sort of methodological improvements against, for lack of a better term, the havoc that will be wreaked by employing those improvements to revise data sets? Is that how are those decisions made? I guess.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot actually. And Marissa, you could probably have more detail on weighing the costs and benefits. But just from a perspective on all our statistics, right? We want to give so data quality is really important to us. There's statistical quality, and so part of statistical quality is accuracy. So we want to be as accurate as we possibly can. We want to be as timely as we possibly can. And so when that's kind of we're looking at the accuracy when we're making these revisions, right? And that's why we try to be very systematic about when we do it too, right? So I mentioned we've got. For GDP, just in general, right? We've got advanced estimates, second estimate, third estimate. And then we've got annual updates where we update these things regularly at the end of September every year. And then we've got so-called comprehensive updates. So for the comprehensives in general, the best data we have, we're going to use. So, we want to be as accurate as we possibly can. There is some discussion, and Marissa, maybe you can talk about it do we do it in an annual update versus for some of the reasons you talked about, or do we do it in a what we call a benchmark or comprehensive? But at the end, we have to have accurate statistics, right? And that's kind of we want to be as accurate as possible. So from where I sit, at least, accuracy is a really big part of data quality. And I understand there is people in the real world have to deal with like, so we were at the Fed yesterday in Dallas, and they were like, just don't change stuff anymore. Can you not? Can you, that was their wish list, right? And we were talking about PCE prices, and because they run it, it's the same exact thing for them, right? They have to recreate a lot of stuff. So I totally get it. I think from my perspective, accuracy is a really big piece of this, and so we have to keep that in mind always as well.
So that leads into just a short follow-up, which is, you talked in the slide that you had on economic accounts about how these are interactive with one another. And I think like on a very basic level, the way that fits together in my brain is like, you need personal income for the nation to reasonably sum up personal income at sub-national accounts. Let's call them state accounts. I know that's not exclusive. But then you also need the national components of PI to sum up state components of PI, and you need the state total PI to match the state components. It quickly becomes like a really complicated puzzle, and I've only started talking about it. Does the constraint where you want all of your statistics to match one another to sort of tell an internally consistent picture of what's going on in the economy cause any of those statistics to sort of overrepresent your confidence in what's happening in that particular series on its own?
That's a really good, and I mean, I consider like almost like a philosophical question, right? Do you want, so another parallel to that is I mentioned the 3 ways we measure GDP. Well, that last one, GDP by production, we actually benchmark to GDP by expenditure. So it's the same thing that's going on there, right? I'd have to think about that. Could it? Yeah, I think it absolutely could do that, right? How often does it do it? I don't know that I have any evidence to say it does it a lot or a little bit, right? I'd have to look at the raw data and then compare it to what we're doing and look at then, probably 5 years. You see what I'm saying? I'm just going through like, how would I evaluate something like that? I don't know that we've done an evaluation like that I'm aware of. We may have internally when we were first going to this method, and I may have to revisit that. So yeah, I mean, I don't really have a good answer to that. It's something we should consider and think about and address at the very least, right? Because it is. So would you rather, let me throw it back at you. Would you rather have a series that's not consistent? So that all the state GDPs don't, the state personal incomes don't add up to national, and you just see the raw data, or would you? Yeah, let me ask it that way.
Probably yes. Like for our purposes, I think that would be superior. But I
feedback.
don't think that you'd get that same answer if you asked everybody in this room or all of the users of your products. I think that there are real pros and cons to both answers.
And I used to work with the guy who'd always say, "Why choose?" I mean, we could actually do both, right? We do seasonally adjusted and not seasonally adjusted. We give people, right, for stuff that who don't want to see, So it doesn't have to be that, but that's the first time I've ever heard that. That's really good feedback to hear. It's not something, like I said, I've ever heard before. Yes, the assumption of this, a lot of times we kind of go downhill. So we start at the national level and it goes down to state and regional. And so that's what we're talking about. It's got to add up. So that we use a lot of shares when we share it out between states, whether it's personal income or GDP or whatnot. And that's kind of the underlying assumption here is that that's the true total, and we're kind of sharing it down. And just to follow on to something I said earlier, when we do GDP by expenditures at the state level, it might change my view, right? Because that's again, you got to do it at the state level, and you're going to get for 50 different states, you're going to get an expenditure version that differs from the income data that we're getting, right? So the income data we're using for the state GDP is coming from the QCW. Those of you familiar with BLS, quarterly census of employment and wages. Yeah.
Just since you said it was helpful feedback, if the group will indulge me for 30 more seconds, then I'll shut up, I promise. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll be really quick. So in a prior update, the Colorado series for non-farm proprietors income indicated like a collapse in Colorado non-farm proprietors income in 2014 and 2015. And no economist in Colorado thought that non-farm proprietors income had collapsed at that time. But we recognize that like you're solving for something else in terms of your apportionment, in terms of composition of personal income, either at the state level or at the national level, or the composition of non-farm proprietors income at the national level. And so it's just like, here's this series that BEA is publishing that we just don't trust.
Yeah.
And that's been revised out, which is great. So that collapse is no longer in the data set. But it caused us to sort of question, like, can we use the data at this resolution, or are there too many of those factors that contribute to it? And I think we've had that conversation. If you have more to say, that's great. Otherwise, I'll shut up.
Nothing else, but I appreciate you raising it. I really do. Thank you for that.
I was sort of curious on what your criteria you use to decide on a special account.
So we got 4 actually, and I don't off the top of my head remember. I was thinking I should review them, but it has to do with, you know, how big is it? And so one is who's asking, right? Because that always matters. If there's significant policy interest in something, or there's going to be legislation around it, I think that's very important, right? Because we need to inform our policymakers. So they're one of our big stakeholders. So it really does depend in terms of the size of the policy interest, the scope of it, or the size of it, in terms of the U.S. economy, right? So is it going to be really small? Is it going to be really big? I think that certainly weighs into us when we're considering. Those are 2. I can't remember. I can come back to you on the other 2, but I remember we have 4 of them that we use. What's another one? You know, from my perspective, and we haven't talked resources yet, but like if you're asking for a satellite account and it's not something that you know, we've already done for some reason, there's a significant cost to it. So, you know, reimbursement, I think, is important for us to, you know, like with NOAA, right? They're going to reimburse us for the marine economy. I think that matters too. So like you think of the marine economy, there's significant policy interest around it. It's reimbursed. It's not a huge part of the U.S. economy, but it's not insignificant, right? I forget how big it is, right? So you've got those, you know, three of those criteria met. Outdoor rec's another one. Huge interest on the Hill in outdoor rec. Huge interest at the state on outdoor recreation. 2.2% is nothing to sneeze at in terms of the size. So hopefully I'm answering your question. I can't remember all of the criteria we go to, but sustainability. It's got to be something we can sustain. So over time, right? I don't want to just do it once or twice and then not be able to do it again. Right. So those are kind of the 4 things that we look at. But you know, these things, a lot of these started before my time, and each one is a little bit idiosyncratic, I think I'll add. Recently, we've gotten interest in something called the geospatial economy. Has been something. There's a lot of policy interest around geospatial activities and how big that sector may or may not be. And right now, I don't think there's a great understanding of how big it is. And so that's another one that folks are kicking around right now. Ties in a little bit to space, but not 100%. Yeah, thanks for that question. All right, so I'm going to quickly breeze through these because I'm looking at the time. You know, so this is really small, and the reason I use it is because I don't get a chance a lot to talk about our staff. And so you see a tremendous amount of innovation we've had since 2011, right? Some of these you'll recognize, some you won't. Just trust me, it is a tremendous amount of innovation. In 2011, we had 511 full-time staff at the Bureau. The end of last month, we had 458. So what you've seen is a huge increase in innovation and new products and timeliness, while our staff levels have fallen by about 10%. And to me, that's just an enormous credit to our team and just the quality of people that we have. And they are, you know, you heard a little bit in the intro that this is my 5th federal agency, so I've got a little experience kind of to judge and compare. And we have got some really great people at BEA who are really dedicated to the mission of the organization, right? And so I bet those of you who have emailed us have gotten responses pretty quickly, which I don't know is always true in every organization that I've worked at, right? And so you know, we pride ourselves on the responsiveness, and we try to help where we can, and I think our team really takes pride in that. And so I use it to highlight that. Normally I'll have a line showing kind of the staff numbers decreasing. Yeah, and you can't modernization can't do everything. IT, there's only so many efficiencies. Those of you, we all know that there's only so many efficiencies you're going to find. There's only so much process improvement you're going to get. Right. At the end of the day, we've got really high quality people that are doing great work for the taxpayers. And I like to take a little bit of time to recognize our team and the great work they do. I want to highlight a few things in innovations, as we wrap. So state R&D, this is one I'm really excited about, because you would think that we already had this, but we don't. And so you heard that I used to work at the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics. Well, when I was there, we jointly stood this up with BEA because we had some surveys there that actually surveyed folks on R&D spending. But we didn't have any R&D spending that was consistent with the national accounts. And so we're going to produce experimental statistics on that soon. And so when you want to, evaluate CHIPS investments, for example, CHIPS Act, you don't have anything right now that's consistent with the national accounts. We will have that soon. It's experimental statistics. It has not been funded, other than when we did it from NSF, that funding ended. So it's a research activity. To take it into production, we'll need to find some additional resources for it. But I'm really excited about this in particular. And the first question I always get is, well, state's great. Can you go lower? Can you get in more detail, right? And I think we can. But then because our information is coming from surveys, you get into disclosure issues. And so the privacy issues bite. And we got to figure out a way to get around some of that if we're going to be able to do it at, maybe we'll be able to county, but even at a metro area level, can we do that? And so that'll be next, that's kind of the stuff, if we can get some more support for this, that we'll start looking into that. But I'm really excited about this in particular, distribution of personal income. There's been great demand in this over the last 10 years. I will tell you that the amount of attention this has gotten compared to the number of downloads that people have, they don't quite match up, right? You would think that this would be flying off the shelf, but there isn't a lot of people that are, that have been looking at this information. And I wish we could get more folks looking at it. And partly that, we got to find a better way to communicate it, I think, because it's complicated, right? And tables don't always appeal to everyone. But this is it became an official statistic last December for the first time ever. It's been a long process. BEA produced distribution of personal income from 1951 to 1963. Then it got discontinued. Then we did it again from like 1972 to 1981. They got discontinued. At that time, it wasn't an official statistic. It's like a business cycle, right, in publishing this. And now it's an official statistic again. You all need to use it. Please go look at it because we want to keep it. And the distribution, alongside, we're doing research on the distribution of personal consumption expenditures. We've also got research on the distribution of savings. And then we have some research on the state distribution of personal income too, that came out last year, and we're hoping to update. So there's a lot going on in this particular area. And then prices. So I'll finish on prices. One fun fact is, so the PCE price index is like, that's the sexy one, right? It's one the Fed follows. That's one everyone reads about. It gets by far the most downloads of anything, even more than the advanced estimate of GDP. But that's not our featured measure of prices. Our featured measure is the gross domestic purchases price index. Probably it's a mouthful. We should change the name of it or something. So PCE is easy, right? Like gross domestic purchase price index is a lot. But the reason we use that is because it's the broadest measure of prices. It doesn't include, right, goods that are exported from the U.S., but it includes everything U.S. residents, including businesses and governments, pay. And that's why we feature it. It's the broadest one. But with PCE, there was so much interest in this. Everyone heard of Supercore. Everyone read about that, right? Supercore PCE. So we started publishing Supercore, with our interpretation of Supercore after talking to the Federal Reserve Board, which is PCE services less energy and housing. And because we didn't want to, we wanted to be able to do it and not have everyone do their own, right? So here's what BEA is saying. There were some folks that we saw some stuff that they were, maybe they weren't respecting the chain weight the way we do, and so they weren't it wasn't exactly what, it wasn't what we would have published, and it wasn't what the board was looking at. So we decided to do this, and we added a couple others. And we try to do that again, try to be responsive to what people want and need in terms of prices too. But there's a lot here. So I know I'm up on time. I'll end it there. I can see if there's any questions anyone has, but sorry I took the whole time. We didn't have a ton of time for Q&A.
I'll start with just a quick question. Kind of in the era of big data, are there efforts to integrate more and more sort of big data into the data products that the BEA is
Yeah.
putting out there?
Absolutely. I mean, so we just hired our first chief data scientist. So he's getting going. And we're looking at different ways. So we've been using private sector data. So if you go back to 1934, when we did national income for the first time, there wasn't a lot of government data out there. So we had to go find different sources, private sector, not private sector, foundations, all of that, and bring it together. And so we've been doing this kind of, using different data sources for a very long time. So GDP, over 200 different data sources go into GDP. 140 of those roughly private sector data sources. So we do tend to do that a lot in terms of specifically big data. Yeah, we've experimented with a lot. I will say that data is, and some of you probably work for data providers, is expensive. And so for us to experiment with it, it can be costly. So we have to really budget for it and plan for it. The other thing is it tends to go away, it's not always stable. So if I go to a Census Bureau, I know they're going to provide it in 20 years. Some of these other sources, that's not true. So I'll give you a specific example. Some of you probably have seen our near real-time consumption data, credit card data that we produce weekly. Our first provider of that data got out of the data business, credit card data business, and we had to change providers. And so so we hear rumblings that the current provider might do the same. I don't know if that's true or not, but we have to think about this and what happens to the product then if they pull it. So yeah, we use big data. It's costly, but we think there's a lot of potential in certain areas. For it. Retail sales is another one. Marissa could probably talk about afterwards.
Yeah, from an economic development standpoint, what are the best pieces of data that you have to use in terms of looking at industries and measuring industries? GDP is obviously good. The satellite accounts are good, particularly for Colorado because they do the outdoor industry. Are there other metrics that you have, or can they be combined with something else to come up with a magic metric?
I don't know if there's a magical one. Maybe Marissa, you have thoughts on that. I think our input-output tables are very good for that kind of stuff. So we have a lot of detail at the industry level. It's a snapshot, annual snapshot, but the input-output tables I think are very good for something like that. I of course like the GDP by industry. And when we do state GDP, even it's a 2-digit NAICS level of industry that we produce it. So you can see it there. We're working on 3. If we can get to 3, it gives you even more granular at the state level. Anything else you can think of?
I think one thing we've been looking with, and we've been working with BLS and others, is putting our data together for users. So we've started to do this with the foreign direct investment data, using some of their QCEW data to get by firm type information. And so we're exploring other ways of helping you bridge our data with other agencies' data as well. I like the Fairfax because I think it tells a really good story. If you want to look at Colorado, you can get the whole picture right there, and it will tell you, the per capita income and how it compares to the US and the ranking. But people slice and dice our data all kinds of ways. So it really depends on what you want to look at and how you want to look at it.
Thanks for that. Yeah, so we think about that a lot, actually. So for our surveys, our 17 surveys, that hasn't been an issue because we're surveying businesses. And so on the business side, the establishment side, for us, our response rate's, I think, over 85%. So it's steady and it's good. But some of our source data, from the Census Bureau and the BLS, that's where some of those concerns come in. I will say that a lot of it is on the demographic side. And a lot of the statistics we're using are the econ statistics that are surveying businesses. So I guess a short answer is I have less of a concern, I think, than you might anticipate because of the types of survey data that we're using from BLS and Census. That doesn't mean we don't keep an eye on it, but from our perspective, the quality is very, very high from what they're providing us for input into the statistics that we are developing.
Any last questions?
I just wanted to say thanks. This is really cool. We really appreciate you coming to Denver. It's great to have this expertise, and we're grateful for the connection recently.
No, great. I want to thank you all. It was a great discussion, great questions. Please reach out. I mean, you can reach out to me, Marissa, our team. That's what we're here for, right? And so really appreciate your time today.
So much. We do have a speaker gift for you.
Oh, thanks so much.
It's been a pleasure.
That's